Check podcasts.
The Bread and Butter Collective is a collection of hospitality professionals working together to help strengthen our industry to build strong culture, community, and sustainability.
I'm Kalen McNeil.
And I'm Sam Jones. And this is the Bread and Butter Podcast.
Sam, welcome to the Bread and Butter Podcast.
Oh my God, I knew I was here.
I almost forgot what our title was.
No, we're here. We're doing the Bread and Butter Podcast.
We are.
We had a weekend and a week.
How was your week? How was yours? You tell me first.
My week was full of good things. I mean, yeah, it was an interesting week. One good thing is I made it through the month. And it was a challenging month, really, to be honest. And I made it through, and it was really good. And it ended on a high note.
Do you feel like October's a new month with new opportunities?
Absolutely. I
so
think
you're entering
awesome.
positive.
Yeah, I think my kind of business schedule was, I was thinking things would turn around about halfway through September, and it feels like it was about 2 weeks late.
So just like a couple days ago?
Yeah, it feels like a couple of days ago things actually turned around to where I want them to. Where I was expecting them to be a couple of weeks ago, and when things don't go according to a schedule, it kind of throws me off. So
I agree.
I feel a little bit more back on track now and feeling good about October.
I'm getting married.
I got an invitation. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Caitlin, I forgot to say this morning, congratulations. I was so happy to get the invitation to the cocktail event.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be the event of the year, isn't it?
Well, I'm just wanting to be on the other side of it. But, it's all the planning and organization and all that. And while you're doing it, while you're still trying to run a business, it's tough.
Yeah, but,
right?
Man, this is all big news.
Yeah.
Huge.
But super positive. Obviously, I love my partner. And
absolutely.
Yeah, she's great.
And I'm assuming she loves you.
Well, I think so. She says she does. So.
I mean, she's going to go through with it.
Yeah, she's going through with it. She hasn't pulled out
yet. Is it just for the party, or is it maybe.
We'll find out after.
I hope not. The horses are expensive.
Exactly.
Very expensive.
Yes. No, for sure. Well, that's another story. I mean, I've been fortunate because I'm also business partners with my ex-wife, Jo Zambry.
Oh, okay.
So we've managed to navigate that very well.
Excellent.
We're still really good friends and really good business partners. And yeah, so I think the total cost of our divorce was $200.
Beautiful.
So, it's a magic.
You should write a book on that.
It's true. Well, the amount of energy, and obviously, listeners, you can hear a third voice here, and we're lucky to have Janice Williams, who's a Victoria City Councillor candidate. We've got the elections coming up on October 15th here across BC, across the country, I guess.
Yeah, it's really quick.
I think it's just BC.
Is it just BC?
Yeah. Just
for the municipal?
Yeah.
See, I don't even know that. So thank you, Janice.
Well,
I think Ontario. I know Toronto's also in the middle of it.
Okay, so there's a few provinces that are doing it, and we're in the throes of a campaign, which it's kind of. I always said, like years ago, I said, like the kind of U.S. rhetoric and politics, like divisiveness, was going to come to Canada. And it's here.
It is
here.
It feels like it's been here for a couple of years.
Yeah, it's been here for a couple of years.
It's not getting any better, is it?
Yeah, no. Yeah, in my opinion, the current leadership is not doing a lot to kind of calm it down. But there's also not a lot can be done because of social media and just the anonymous nature of some of the more personal type attacks, which I feel is really toxic and doesn't do the electorate favors. It doesn't do policy favors. It doesn't do outcomes favors, and really it just gives breeding ground for toxicity, which is not what I like.
And if you give it an inch, toxicity will take a mile.
Oh, it owns everything.
It's so prevalent, and it's so
insatiable.
I think being toxic in itself means that it spreads easily. It feels pervasive, and if you don't set up real clear boundaries,
and it can be really overwhelming too.
Oh my God!
Really overwhelming. Like it's as a candidate in this election, it's the one thing that I've really disliked is how ramped up people can get. And at the end of the day, I just have to remind myself I can't control what other people do.
Yes, exactly.
I have to be responsible for what I do and how I act online. And there's been a couple of times where I've been called out, and actually I've thanked the person saying, hey, thank you for, you know what, you've got a point here. You're right. I shouldn't have gone there. I'm sorry.
Well, and you know what? The fact of the matter is everybody makes mistakes.
Yeah.
Like even when you're caught up in the heat of the moment and you say something, my whole thing about it is if I'm not allowed to apologize or to shift my position or at least have the openness to be able to do that, then you're really just putting people into corners and you're not allowing them to be actually humans. And you would never do that to somebody if you're looking them in the face.
No, you wouldn't.
You know, like, so I always try to think, okay, what if this person and I were having coffee? Like, how would I be communicating with them? And I remember getting a letter, and it's related to switching positions. And we had an issue with with the COVID policy around, fast food restaurants being able to not do passport or the vaccine passport scans. And we were like, well, we sell like 3% of our product in alcohol, so it's not really relevant. We had a meeting about it, and we're like, well, why don't we just suspend our liquor sales? And that way we can be more like a regular fast food joint, like that we're competing against.
Yeah.
And just the nuances in a 1,400 square foot space with the volume that we do. I didn't know how our staff was going to be able to manage the passport thing. So I made a decision just to say, well, let's suspend our liquor license. I got a couple letters that called us out for that decision. And I was like, you know what? I think they're right. And I said, we're going to change that.
Yeah.
So we are going to start doing it because at the time it was the right thing to do. We made a decision that we thought was sort of in our interest, but our staff's interest, but it isn't consistent with what our company does. And I think, and they actually were surprised that I just switched our position. But this is what people need to be more willing to do, in my view, is if you're listening to facts or some light is being shed on different solutions and you're just so rigid, then you were never really looking out for what the best interests were. You're just really trying to push your agenda, which then you got to ask motivation for that. Like, why are you pushing your agenda? Like, what do you have? And I find in this environment we're in now, especially with all the varied crises that we're dealing with homelessness, opioids, crime, affordability, zoning policy debates, all of it is the fosters just complete, that whole environment of just tension and pigeonholing people into their little tribes. And there's no room for debate and common sense. And also there's no room for people changing their positions because they fought so hard to put themselves in that position. Then how, I just think the growth of humanity is we only grow because people are able to change. Right?
Well, and we only grow usually when we are challenged.
Yes.
When we have a difficulty or something to solve. Like that, when there is that stretch that you have to do, and it's like, oh my goodness, how am I going to get from point A to point B and figuring it out? And a lot of the growth is in figuring it out.
100%.
And so you kind of have to go, okay, if I want to achieve this, how am I measuring that?
Yeah.
And am I willing to have an honest look at that on the way? And when I get there, and if you aren't willing to measure it, and if you aren't willing to actually say, have I reached my goal or not, you aren't really approaching the problem authentically.
Yes. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And a little bit of authenticity, I think, goes a really long ways. Because even if you're failing, if you have the courage to say, hey,
this didn't work.
Yeah. You absolutely need to change and pivot and go, okay, what are our other options? And sometimes there's only so many solutions you can expect to come up with yourself.
Yeah.
And you need to build those bridges.
100%.
You need to go, what other ideas are there?
Right? There's combinations of ideas where your idea on one side of the political spectrum or ideology will match really well with something on the middle or the left ideology if you're both open to discussing and debating, and then also pivoting when the outcomes are different. Like when you're not getting, I'm all about outcomes. Like I don't want to hear anything about your ideology or whatever. Let's put the plan in place. Let's see what the outcomes are. And if the outcomes, and again, when you talk about measurable, let's measure them. Let's agree on what the criteria are of success. And then let's see which outcomes are better. And then let's just keep doing the outcomes that work and eliminate the outcomes that don't.
Yeah. And one of the other big challenges I think there is, so I come from originally the provincial government as an economist. So
I'm just kidding. I'm joking. Yay!
It's actually a really great place for.
Oh, I would imagine.
Because you have data.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And you have pretty good data. And at the municipal level, I sometimes go, okay, what is our data that we have? And I'd like to see some investment in that.
Yeah.
If we are going to actually make progress, we are going to need to collect some information to be able to do that.
Like, are we throwing too much, like, excuse my language, but I guess crap against the wall and seeing what sticks? Is that kind of what's happening? And there's no measurable outcomes from that?
I don't know. Part of it's that. Part of it, I think, is ideological. And I think part of it's sometimes the desire to import something from somewhere else. Well, I see this over in the States. I'm just going to wholesale import it. Yeah. Well, we aren't the States. Yeah. And I think we kind of have to really be clear. No, we're Canada. We're Victoria. We are this. Yeah. And distinguish ourselves. Because I think we do a disservice when we say, well, if it's a problem over there, it's a problem here.
Yeah, not all. They may present themselves as similar problems, but there's also a lot of background issues that
and a lot of nuance.
And nuance, exactly.
Like for Canada and Victoria, I think a bigger issue with us is our history around First Nations and coming to terms with that and reconciling that and having a path forward where that is better supported, where and I really have to give kudos to the school system. They're doing so much more. Like I look at what my kids are learning about and I'm like, wow, as a kid in the 90s, did we hear about residential schools? No. I know my children know about that. Yeah. And I appreciate it. And
that's a pretty big step forward, even as simple as it is. And I think people would say, like, the counter argument would be like, oh, we need to do way more. And I agree, there's a lot more that needs to be done. But it has to start somewhere. Yeah. And when you look at, we're probably, you're younger than me, but we grew up in the same sort of gamut.
We're probably
are we close?
Similar.
We look better than me. I've been worn hard and put away wet too often, I guess. But anyway, we, I grew up, and part of what motivates me is I grew up in Terrace, BC, northern BC community, a lot of Indigenous population. There's Indo-Canadian population. All of that. It was a melting pot, but I know I live right next door to one of my best friends, Preston Guno. And it's kind of a short, I'm going to tell the story because it's pretty interesting and it informs kind of how I think about the world. So I grew up next to Preston and, there was alcoholism surrounding some of the issues in his family, and extended family. And we were very close up until we were about 16 or 17. And then Preston moved to Vancouver, went on about his life. We kept in a little bit of contact, but I didn't see him again until I was probably, I guess I would have been 35 or 36. And we both passed each other. He was sitting on a bench in a mall, and I walked past him. And as I was walking past, I'm thinking to myself, I think that's Preston. Like, I just had a feeling. So I went and I was buying a belt. I was going to a Christmas party. And then I came back, and Preston had thought the same thing, thought it was me, so he waited. Yeah. So we reconnected. And then I was like, hey, Preston, what are you doing? And he's like, well, I'm working with Indigenous youth on the downtown east side. And I was like, oh my God, that's awesome, right? And then he was working for the government at the time. He was coming to Victoria. So for the next 15 years, we had a really good, tight relationship. But he ended up, sadly, about 4 years ago, passing away of cancer. And we went for dinner probably 2 months before he passed. And he just said, I've got this back pain and whatever. But it wasn't until his memorial service in Vancouver that I realized the impact that he had made in the community. And he never, we had been close, tight for 12 to 15 years. And I knew he was doing stuff because I do some documentary work with Krista Loughton. And he was wanting to get involved from the Indigenous perspective of that because he'd done so much work in that area. But I went to his memorial service, and the Chief of Police of Vancouver, a whole bunch of, social support nonprofits were there. And they just talked about what a difference he made in that community. And here we go, like for me, going through, you don't know who's doing what work.
Where?
And where, right?
You often just see the tip of the iceberg of who a person is. Well, I know this person in this sphere, but you may not know anything about everything else that they do.
And what their motivations are and what their intent is and all
where
of that
they're
stuff.
coming from. And it's one of those things where you get to know someone and you're like, okay, yeah, I can vouch for that person. I know them well. I have no hesitation saying this is a good person that I'd like to see here because. Yeah,
and I think good people make mistakes, and it's
we all do.
We all do. We're all human. We all gotta own them, and that's I think what makes leaders good. Good leaders good is when they own their mistakes, and also when they map out their plan and involve the groups to discuss. And in any plan you map out, you're gonna have people that don't agree with you.
Yeah.
And you're also going to have different outcomes than maybe intended. And I think as long as you're always navigating and looking at those different things, but then being honest with yourself, whether it's working or not. Just because you came up with the idea doesn't mean it's a good one.
Well, and often, like for myself, I don't need credit for the idea at all. Yeah. I just want things that work.
Yeah.
And when I look at who I surround myself with, I don't want cheerleaders necessarily. I don't want the people who are going to tell me what I want to hear.
Yeah.
I want the people who are going to tell me what I need to hear.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because the danger is when you think everything's going fine and it's awesome and that's when you get blindsided.
Yeah.
I want the person who says, "Oh, wait, did you think about this?"
Yeah.
Or it's really hurting over here. People are really struggling. This has had this negative impact. And I don't want someone saying, no, it didn't have that negative impact.
Yeah.
No, you're invalidating that experience. Just because other people have it worse or people are, it doesn't mean. So I really like it when there's some honesty there.
Yeah.
So I'd like to kind of follow up on what you're saying and what you're saying about not. You can see the tip of the iceberg, but you don't know where the person's coming from or why you want to put them in a place of power.
Yeah.
And for the sake of our one listener, two listeners, if you count my mother.
Listen, we have way more downloads than we think.
Okay, probably, but
it's actually sometimes shocking the impact a person can have with a relatively small.
Right. Exactly.
And for those people and for myself, I really want to start to get into like where you're coming from. What issues are really important to you, and why? What is? I can see the tip of your iceberg, but where's the base? Where
why did you do this?
Why did I do this?
Why would you put yourself?
Why would you put yourself into this?
Why would I?
I ask that myself every day.
Well, and sometimes even now I ask myself. Why? Really? You have a full life.
Yeah, exactly.
You've got lots of things on your real family and everything else. And I think a good chunk of it is because I love this city. This is where our business is. This is where we're raising our family. We live in Victoria. I've lived here 25 years. I grew up in Alberta, actually. Single mom raised me.
Me too.
For the most part, right? A small town.
Where in Alberta?
Camrose.
Oh, Camrose. Awesome.
So nice.
I love Camrose.
Yeah, everyone knows Camrose. It's not Canmore.
No, it's not Canmore.
It's not Canmore? Oh, I don't know.
Yeah, okay, now you don't like it.
That's people often confuse the two. Oh, isn't it by the mountains? And I'm like, no. No, it's not.
It's small town Canada.
It's small town Canada. Yeah. So I moved out here at the age of 17, 2 months shy of my 18th birthday, the day of the big snowstorm.
Oh, wow.
Right?
That's
so
crazy.
My parents both went back to school as adults, right? So my mom, 3 kids by the age of 22, marriage failed at 27, that early 90s kind of thing. So the childhood was not well cushioned.
Yeah.
Parents were paying their own student loans when we emerged, right? Yeah. So it's like, okay, fine, kid, you can go, but
you're on your own.
Yeah. Right? So moved out here, day of the big snowstorm. You pivot. You make do what you can. Yeah. You don't have a car, so you do the bus. Find a place to live. Okay, we're set up, right? And you're doing school, and then 4 months in, it was right after that first term of university. Went back for my high school grad because I was one of those weird kids that did high school fast.
Yeah.
Right?
The smarty pants.
And I turned bright yellow. This is summer, right? This is your opportunity to earn some money for the next. Bright yellow, dropped 30 pounds. I was not an overly chunky person to begin with.
Were you sick?
I was quite sick.
Oh my God.
Actually, a gallstone lodged itself in the common bile duct.
Oh my God.
But it took them like a month to figure it out.
Yeah.
And, after a month, my parents were like, Kate, you're sick. You're coming home.
Yeah.
Right? Went home to Alberta. They did an ultrasound. I was like, oh, look, there's a gallstone.
Crazy.
So that summer was a write-off.
Yeah.
Right? Forget about earning any money or anything else. But such is life. Come back in the fall. My bank account depleted. It's like, okay, budget was tight before. Now it's non-existent. So I got a job at Tim Hortons and juggled school and work
fantastic.
and minimum wage and whatever else. So I knew that struggle. And you're riding your bike everywhere because in Victoria, the buses suck. Or at least back then they did.
Yeah.
I don't know if they still do.
And it was the 90s, and bike riding was a thing to do.
It was, but I mean, there wasn't quite the bike lanes and
no
whatnot that we have now.
You kind of took your life in your own hands a lot of times.
Kind of, right? So, got through my first degree, finally got a reasonably good job with the provincial government. My first job after university was as an employment standards officer. And
cool.
Yeah, it was actually really cool. And I'm sure a lot of people are like, oh, look at this 20-year-old telling me what to do. Right? And it was interesting because you had people and they had problems and you were in the position of saying, okay, what are the facts? And you make findings of facts.
Yeah.
You look at the evidence and you go, okay, this is what you are entitled to. Employer, here's the rules.
This is what you didn't do.
This is what you have to do. And employment standards really are the floor of employment conditions.
Yeah, totally.
The way I used to describe it was the collective agreement for those that don't have one.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah,
That's
that's
a good
right.
way to put it.
Yeah, right. And that was a really good experience. Did that for about a year, and then the Liberals got elected. They did their core review.
Yeah.
And of course, no seniority at all, right?
See ya, Janice.
But it was
Thanks
okay
for showing up.
I had already started my grad studies at that point, and you pivot.
Yeah, there's an opportunity to get more education.
More education, whatever else. So I was doing my master's, and the employment standards work, it opened the door for. Well, first I did a couple of terms with Tourism BC, which was funny. I had terrible luck as a young adult. I will say that much. So I started Tourism BC as a co-op student.
Yeah.
Right. September 2001. So I started September 3rd, 2001.
Great for tourism.
Oh my God.
Coming right up.
Starts with a snowstorm.
Yeah.
Middle of the package, you've got 9/11 happening.
Yeah, so
Shut down
it's
the
just
world.
So that work term got cut short, but only by a few weeks.
Yeah.
Right, and then I did forests, and then went with the Industrial Relations Board. At which point I was almost done my master's, and I got laid off again because that's what young people do.
Yeah, yes,
right?
Exactly.
You build your experience, you build your resume, and you bounce. You learn how to bounce as a young person.
Yeah.
And so then I did consulting work and landed with the Ministry of Health, Vital Statistics Agency.
And what did you get your master's in?
Economics.
Economics? Okay.
Yeah. And that was super interesting. And
So that's a lot of data stuff as well,
lots
right?
of data, births, marriages, deaths, right? And
So micro, macro?
my master's extended essay was in labor economics.
Oh, cool.
So it was looking at the impact of replacement worker legislation on collective bargaining outcomes. Which
boring. It sounds perfect for city council.
Well, no, but lots of data.
Yeah.
Right. And so in with the Ministry of Health, and that was great and lovely, really interesting. Lots of data. Then went to Ministry of Education. In the interim, I had a couple. Met my husband.
Met your husband? Your husband was there somewhere?
Actually, it was funny. When I met my husband, I probably wouldn't have given him the time of day under normal circumstances. But
you fell in love with him.
Well, no. So I had ended a 5-year relationship before. And then, as a young single woman, I had a rule. I don't date single dads.
Yeah. Oh, interesting.
Do not
date
single dads, right? And so after that relationship ended, I was like ready to leave the city, leave the country.
Yeah.
I was looking at emigrating to the UK. And so I went out for New Year's Eve. And I was like, okay, I'm going to a new country. I better get used to going out on my own.
Yeah.
Flipped a coin to decide where to go.
Oh, wow.
Right? It was like, okay, heads Canoe Club, tails, I'm heading to Hugo's.
Yeah.
Right? And
So it was at Hugo's?
So it was at
I used to go to Hugo's.
Well, yeah. Well, and so I was in line. New Year's Eve, I was like, if I'm going to drink, I should eat.
Yeah.
Right? And so I decided to go in line to the restaurant, Sanook at the time, before it changed to what it is now. And my husband's group was in front of me, and I get to the front. Any tickets left? No. Okay. But there's probably tickets on the bar side. So I go back to the Hugo's line. And it was a buddy and his group who approached me. Hey, our group has a spare ticket. Do you want to buy it? I was like,
they sold it to you.
Well,
young
and I was
entrepreneur.
like, okay. So anyhow, his group adopted me for the night. Right? Halfway through the night, he's like, I don't care if you're moving to London. You're beautiful. Let me take you for dinner.
Wow. Awesome.
And I was like, okay.
And you knew at that point he had a child?
Not one.
Oh, 2.
But several.
Oh, my
With
goodness.
2 exes.
Oh, my goodness.
So no complications.
No, none, right? But he is one of the most amazing people I have ever met.
Oh, fantastic.
Super down to earth. And if you can have 2 exes and have good relationships with those exes
and
be committed to raising those children in a functional way, and my stepkids are amazing people. They're 21 and 25 now.
Wow.
They've decided to follow in their dad's footsteps. They're both in law school. So
awesome.
They're doing really great. And so I said, yeah. And 4 months later, we decided to move in together. 2 years later,
got married. Wow, and you didn't go to the UK?
I didn't go to the UK.
Well, lucky for us.
Well, and lucky for me, frankly, because I am super grateful for the life that we've been able to build, right? So we had my daughter in 2010, my son in 2012, but that experience in and of itself, and this is how life works, right? You've got your career, then you add a family, and then you get interested in other things. So my daughter's birth did not go as planned.
Doesn't surprise me.
It's the nature of the beast.
Yes. Yeah, right?
Right. And as a result of that, I wound up really engaged on maternal advocacy, right? Because part of who I am and what I do is, you've had a crappy experience, and that sucks. What can you do to prevent someone else from having the same crappy experience? So if I can provide a hand up, if I can help someone else avoid falling down the same pit.
Yeah.
And I've grown every pit that I fell down. I will happily say, end of the day, it's probably a good thing.
Yes.
But so I started, actually it was after my son was born, the Cesarean by Choice Awareness Network.
Oh, interesting. Yes, I think I read that.
Yeah, and it's a private Facebook group, and it's got Pauline McDonough Hall and whatnot. But so the blog that I started with that, which was Awaiting Juno, which is the original Twitter handle.
Yes.
And all of that, it has helped thousands of women.
Yeah. Good for you.
avoid a similar expense.
Yeah,
like,
experience.
and it's one of those contentious issues,
Yeah.
especially in Victoria. Like, you say, I want a cesarean, you may as well have 3 heads.
Wow, and I guess
Right?
that's the female experience, obviously.
It
right?
is, and it's one of those struggles, and so women's health is one of those issues that I've taken on, and then over the years, there's been a few other
Yeah.
issues, and as a result of motherhood and whatever else, in 2016, when my husband's original business partnership kind of fell through, so he started the law firm in 2014. 2016, they had irreconcilable differences.
You do
As it
in
happens.
business, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
business is one of those, it's like
Yeah.
a marriage.
Yeah, it is,
Either
exactly.
it works and it's wonderful,
Yeah.
or it doesn't, and you for both of you, you
Yeah.
need to find other ways. And so,
And they're sorry, just to touch on this because I think it's kind of relevant for business. Did they have proper like agreements in place at the beginning so they knew how to unravel? I mean, they're
pretty
lawyers,
pretty much.
so they would kind of
pretty
think
much.
about that stuff.
Yeah.
It doesn't make it any easier.
No, it
Yeah.
doesn't make it easy.
No.
It's never easy, and often it's a case of how do we pivot? How do we, right? And we had bought our house in 2012. We rented it before we bought it. And we bought it always with the idea of someday we'll be able to rebuild.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And so we were almost at the point of rebuilding when things
happened.
blew up with the partnership. And it was like, okay, we aren't rebuilding.
Yeah.
Not
Time
right
to hold
now.
those plans off, yeah.
We got to push pause on that. And so all of our resources went into buying the partner out, getting through that.
Yeah.
I spent my flex days at that point marketing the law firm. It was like, okay, I'll help you through this.
Well, it's everybody's got to pick up a shovel and start doing stuff, right? Yeah.
And that's the nature of it,
And
right?
it's way more expensive to buy out a partner than just the purchase price. There's so much more involved.
There's a
Well,
lot.
and emotionally too.
Well,
Emotionally, yeah.
and in our circumstance, my understanding is that we basically retained all the overhead
Yeah.
and lost half the files. And there's a payout.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And you then sit down with the dictionary and you go, okay, there's a name change involved for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
And on you go. And so I spent my flex days, marketing the firm and
Trying
doing
to grow
the
back
business
the
end,
business that
grow
you
back
lost,
the business, right? And that fall we decided, hey, maybe we'd be better off as a family. And so 2016, my son would have been 4, my daughter would have been 6. So just emerging from that daycare end, I was really finding myself struggling work-wise because your husband's a lawyer, a small business owner. They're doing 70 to 90-hour weeks.
That's right. Yeah.
Right? That's just the
way it
nature of
is.
the beast. So I'm the parent that's always dropping off the kids, always picking them up, always staying with them. And I'm an employee and I'm feeling guilty because it's like, I'm not the employee who can come in early.
That's right.
I'm not the employee who can stay late.
Yeah.
I am not the employee. And so I was feeling really, and I never got any flack at all.
Yeah.
The provincial government's great in terms of accommodating parents in that regard. But I felt bad personally.
Yeah, your own personal ethic.
Yeah.
But even that, isn't that funny that you would like this concept and idea that, because I had a single mother that raised us and she had 4 kids, and the idea that you're battling that internal guilt about whether you should be spending time working with your family or working your job, and that there's that I don't know, and women seem to be way more
likely.
Yes, but to have that
it's
guilt,
changing. But depending on how your family's set up and whatnot, you got to make whatever works for your family work.
Yeah.
Right. So that fall we had a conversation. It was decided, it'd be a better balance if I just joined the law firm full time.
Right.
Then I'm my own boss.
Yeah.
I'm half owner of it anyhow.
Yeah. Right.
Do the business, and I'm not a lawyer.
Yeah.
Not at all. People often ask, so are you a lawyer? And I'm like, nope. I'm an economist.
Yeah.
So I do the number crunching. Occasionally I wear an HR hat. From time to time I've had to step in as a legal assistant.
Yeah, and administration and
whatever. As a small business owner,
you got to do it
you
all.
understand
Yes,
right?
yeah.
Changing hats.
You change your hats and you do what you need to do to make it work. But what was great about that was I actually got to see my husband.
Yeah. Which is important.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, it's
You gotta
super
have a relationship.
Well, you do, and I'm super grateful that we have a really great relationship. I could not have picked a better partner.
Oh, that's awesome.
So I'm really glad circumstance intervened to say, hey, this is the right guy,
Yeah.
even though he wouldn't normally.
Coin toss. It was a good.
It was a coin toss.
Yeah.
It was a
I
good
love
choice.
it.
Yeah. So, so I went to work for the law firm full time, and that's been great because it really gave me the perspective of a small business owner.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And so from time to time, I've been pulled in on community issues, Beacon Hill Park,
Yeah.
Richardson, Clover Point,
Yeah.
those things. And it's like you can take the girl out of government, but sometimes you can't take the policy wonk out of the girl.
Yes.
And it's been frustrating because while I've seen a lot of good things happen in this city over the last 4 years, a lot of it's been really aggravating.
And I guess it doesn't matter, well, how things come to be should matter.
Yeah.
Because when you talk about the policy issues and how decisions are being made, I think you need that framework. It's like anything, like a business plan in business. Like you need that framework to guide you. So even though sometimes some outcomes are positive, I don't think it's necessarily on the backs of bad policymaking or stepping out of the governance component of it. I don't think that's a good thing. Mm-hmm. Like I'm all about outcomes. So sometimes, oh great, the outcome was great, but
looking at why is important.
Why, and then how the decisions were made, and then what was guiding those decisions, and then were you outside the purview of where you should have been?
Yeah.
Because that is where democracy breaks down. Is when you all of a sudden just make your own rules as you go along and things. And I'm not saying they did, but I'm saying there's probably some of that.
And I kind of think when it comes to city council, there's a real duty there to understand that it's not actually about you as a person. You bring who you are to whatever job you do. But in that role, you're serving others. Mm-hmm. And you really have to put yourself in that position of what's in the best interest of my community. What does my community want? How do I advance what my community needs? And I might personally think closing Clover Point is great, wonderful, lovely. I mean, I live right there. I never have to take a car to Clover Point. Why wouldn't I want it closed? Yeah. But it's not about that. It's about, okay, how has this impacted people? How is the use of this facility?
Who's getting left behind?
Who's getting left behind? Yeah. And is this a good decision that reflects what the community wants? Yeah. And that's where good governance comes in, where you have to separate yourself as an individual and what you want from what's good for the community. And I just think it's a difficult thing to do. Yeah. And I kind of think having done it a few times personally, because business owner, you put the needs of the business first, for sure, as you know.
Yeah, and your staff,
and your
customers.
And I mean, you just went through COVID, and I remember when that hit, because I was sitting in my office and I was like looking at the numbers, and it's like, why aren't people paying their bills?
Yes, exactly.
Right? And it was like the world froze, and you're just going, what are we going to do?
If they're not paying the bills, I'm not paying my bills.
But you don't have a choice. Your staff are, and it was like, how do we maintain our staff? Yeah. How do we get through this? How do we ensure our clients' needs are met? Yeah. And everything else. And you really do have to put yourself and your personal interest last.
100%.
Right? Yeah. As a mom.
Yeah. Well, totally. It's the exact same thing.
It is. And so I like the idea of parents and business owners and people with a full breadth of experience being there. I think it's important that we also have younger people there because they're facing different challenges than what you or I faced. It's a very different world now. I accept that. And how do we get a council that kind of reflects a broad spectrum of the community?
Yeah, I think that is something that is missed And I know, obviously, what I put out in public, it's easy to determine where I land on the political spectrum. But I think people don't quite understand that I'm also about diversity in ideas and challenging, the status quo.
Yeah.
Pushing the envelope a little bit, but doing it in a way that makes sense, that protects the institution of the city council and with its primary mandate. I don't want letters going to UN or suing the oil patch or any of that stuff, because that is ideological. We really need to get it back down to what municipal issues are. I do think there's crossover because obviously housing is a provincial and federal jurisdiction, but we control zoning. We control bylaw. We control all those things. But having diversity, because every voice needs to be represented in some way.
And also ways of how we do that. Like I'm aware there's a disability and accessibility committee. Maybe we look at our committees and go, how do we enable others to have voices even if they aren't directly at the council table? Because there also needs to be a bit of a recognition of why some people aren't represented there. And there's good reasons. I mean, this is a huge demand. Ultimately, what I'd like to see at the end of the 4 years is a council that works well, that has meetings that function, that aren't 12-hour marathons.
Yes, exactly.
Like, looking at this commitment and looking at my life, I am sure my husband was...
What are you doing?
What? I'm going to lose my wife for 4 years. I'm like,
no,
you aren't. You're just going to have to share me. But part of my goal is something that functions well. And if it's functioning well, it would be really nice if no one could recall any of the names of anyone who's on council 4 years from now.
Because
it runs so well. Right? When things are going well, you take them for granted. Right? And so I would really like it if it becomes something that any small business owner, parent, adult who feels like they're in a position where, okay, now it's time for me to give back to my community, feels like they can do so without sacrificing everything else in their life.
That's right. There needs to be balance in anything you do. But I also think that, the public sector, or especially when it comes to political stuff, it shouldn't be toxic.
No.
And it should be welcoming. People of all ideologies, and I mean that, all ideologies. Like, if you find your people and you want to, put it out in the world, you've got the right to do that in a free society. And I support it 100%. Obviously, if you're saying let's, light people on fire, that's not going to work. But,
that crosses a line.
There's certain lines across, and depending on what side of the spectrum you're on, you're going to think certain lines are different than others. But that's just good debate, good discussion, but the underlying base should be good policy.
Well,
right?
And I've often thought I wish debate was a core course.
Yes.
I did debate as a kid. Yes, I was that geek. In case you hadn't guessed yet.
No, your profile is being set now.
And so I did debate through high school. And the great thing about debate is it forces you to really research both sides of the issue, because you didn't know which side of the issue you were arguing until they drew the card.
Yeah, that's right.
And it's like, okay, now this. And the other great thing about debate was they taught you the rules of engagement. Okay, if you make a personal account, personal attack, you've lost it. If you're like insulting their mother, or how they're dressed, or
plus if you're doing that, like, where is the merit of your argument?
It's not there.
Why do you need to step on people in order to promote what your ideas are? Like, if your ideas can stand on their own.
If your ideas can stand on their own, you shouldn't need to do that. And if you are having to do that, it's time to step back. Right, because are you going to be able to sleep at night? And I've struggled this campaign with a lot of attacks that have been personal and not nice. I've had my personal information flogged out there for the world to see, and it sucks. But at the end of the day, I hope what I've done, and actually I know I've done this because I have no problem sleeping at night. I've run a clean campaign.
I would agree with that, and because you and I follow each other on Twitter. We've had some dialogue and debates, and I definitely, honestly, I probably had more of an issue with some of the earlier, like, interchanges as far as like the truthfulness of the integrity of the argument versus like people getting their back up. Like obviously you're going to get your back up if you disagree or how you're communicating, but I've seen a transition with you as far as the debate on there, where it's a lot more open, and you know your communication and all that stuff is awesome. So my hat off to you, because it's not easy.
It's not easy.
No, it's not easy because when you're getting attacked, you're like your natural instinct is to fight back.
Well, and it's also a very different thing being a candidate, I think, versus being an engaged observer.
Totally.
Right? And historically, I've been more of an engaged observer for the most part. Now I'm a candidate. Yeah. That's a different role.
Yeah.
Right? So you got to adjust how you're doing things.
Well, and I think it's about building a bigger umbrella. And again, you're representing the community. Yeah. So even if you're not representing the people that voted for you, you're representing the community and the community's best interests. And you're going to bring what you bring to the table for that. Yeah. And that's why having a diverse council, I think, would be the best result.
It really would be.
You know?
And I mean, ideally, you'd have people that have walked many shoes and many paths, but those people are few and far between. So sometimes you have to accept, okay, how do we engage with the people who are walking the paths now?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. They may not be done their journeys, but they're on that path now. What are their struggles? Yeah. What are their successes? What can we learn from them?
Yeah.
So it's really interesting, and I've learned a lot. I will say that much. Yeah. Being a candidate's a little like, you know how before you're a parent, you're a perfect parent?
Yes, exactly. You know all this is how
you know everything. Yeah. Before you're a candidate, you're a perfect candidate, and then you're like, oh.
Yeah.
Okay, wait.
Well, even on some of these issues too, like, obviously, your opinions and your ideas of things should change over time if you're actually integral in what you're trying to do and learn and grow. And there's always things like, I don't think there's any, like, if the issues that we're facing were easily fixed, they'd be fixed. Done. They're not.
And I don't think anyone approaches these things with the intent of not fixing something. Mm-hmm. I think everyone who has stepped up deserves a thank you, because
I agree.
To the degree that they've tried their best, that deserves to be applauded. It takes a lot of guts to put yourself out there, right? And I thought about this decision a long while before I decided, okay, this is something I'm doing, and it's not a decision to be taken lightly.
No,
it really isn't, because the instant you're there, okay, now you're a public figure.
Yeah.
Okay, and how does that impact my family?
Yeah.
How does that impact my business? How does that impact everything else?
Yeah.
And I really appreciate those who have taken the time and said, yeah, this is something I can do, and I'm going to do my best efforts. Because it takes courage.
Yeah.
You need to know yourself. You need to know your strengths. You need to know your weaknesses. And it's not for everyone. It really isn't.
I couldn't imagine. I mean, I've contemplated running myself over the years, and after just being in this election cycle, I'm just
this election cycle is something else.
Forget it.
This election cycle is something that you better have a rhino hide.
Yes. Well, and it's not going to bring, like, how do you expand the base of people that are interested in doing it when you've basically put yourself in a guillotine? And maybe you'll survive, maybe you won't. And even your character is attacked and all that stuff.
Well, and I think what you do is you do it knowing what you're stepping into, and you try to do the best job possible of it. Yeah. And by doing that, hopefully you get to a place where it's a better environment 4 years from now.
Yeah.
Where 4 years from now, we actually are at a place where it's something that's not as toxic, that it's more collegial, that it's more functional.
Collaborative.
Right? And it's a really hard thing to do.
Yeah.
I might fall flat on my face.
Yeah.
I know that. But if I didn't try, and I could have, would I regret it? And I think I would.
Yeah.
Right? So the best I can do is put myself out there, put my ideas out there,
admit
when I make a mistake.
Well, and I think that's the thing, is if you're open to criticism and you're open to feedback and you're open to learning, then how wrong could you go? I also think that, like, I went to a panel and I think there was like almost like you weren't there, but there was like 28 or 29 that were there, and every single one of them cared about the city.
Yeah.
Every single one of them, was putting themselves forward.
Yeah.
And honestly, like, cause I kind of look at and I think, okay, what would I think? And if there was a cross section of all of those people that were on council, I'd be happy. The idea that some people are going to be on there and destroy the city, it's just, to me, it's fear mongering.
Yeah.
Like, I think if you just randomly took 9 people out of that group and put them together, I would imagine that they'd get some stuff done. But
maybe not. I mean, I kind of look at this. So putting on the voter's hat and putting on the small business hat.
Provided random gets you diverse, because I want a diverse.
Provided random gets you diverse, but on the same token, you when you have a position available in your business, you don't want to put some random person in there.
No.
Why? Because they may not have the skill set that's needed for that.
Yeah.
The times when I've had to be a legal assistant, I will admit, I am not anywhere near as good of a legal assistant as our actual real legal assistants. I'm much better with spreadsheets.
Yeah.
That's life, right? Yeah. So we don't really want random. This is an opportunity where, look at the resumes. Look at who these people are, what they bring to the table, what their experiences have been, what their attitudes are. View the campaign as an extended job interview.
Yeah.
And make your list. Sit down, make your list. Who are the 9 people who are going to be collaborative and open? Who are the 9 people who are going to serve this city best? And it's tricky, especially when you have 37. I mean,
37 is a big number.
It's a hard thing to put to give the public the responsibility to know who those right people are who will be collaborative, because there's no way the public knows enough about everyone who's
They don't do the work.
Well, no, I keep thinking back in politics, and especially currently in today's politics, I almost want it to be like the ancient Greeks, like all of a sudden it's
jury
your
duty.
Turn. It's jury duty. Yeah,
it's jury duty.
It's your turn to be a politician, and I can't. I've been thinking about this for the last couple of weeks. Actually, I heard someone talking about it, and it hasn't left my brain.
Yeah.
It's like, wouldn't that be just a better way to get a random selection of people? Because really,
governed by your peers.
Well,
it's like a jury.
It is a jury.
Yeah. But even with a jury, there's some qualification there. So the lawyers will interview the individuals, and they will go.
And that is like a job interview, too.
Yeah. It is kind of.
And people are going to come up with excuses why they can't be a politician for the next 4 years. Like, I'm sick.
Some of them are very valid.
And absolutely. And those kind of things have to be taken into account. But, I mean, wouldn't it be, like, I don't know. It just feels so proper nowadays, because it feels like, and I'm not talking about Victoria politics necessarily, although it feels like people get into politics for a reason. And if it's not for the benefit of everyone, then maybe it's benefit for themselves, or benefit for something that they bring to the table. It's not for everybody.
And right? Sometimes I wonder about people who want it too much.
Yeah.
Right? And there's a fine line there. And there's something to be said for a reluctant politician.
Yeah.
I will say that had things gone better at the city level for the last 6 years, I probably wouldn't have done it. I'd probably they're doing a fine job.
Yeah, you strike me as someone who's a little bit reluctant.
I am actually, right? Like
So you're coming into it as a reaction to the last 6 years, partially, right?
Partially, but it's also partially, okay, I do think my knowledge, skills, and abilities bring something to the table. I do think I'm part of that cross-section that needs to be there. And if I'm not willing to be there, who am I to expect some other business owner to be there?
Yeah, yeah, that's right.
Right?
Yeah.
So...
Well, I obviously respect the fact that you've put your name in and your stand up. And what are the 3 things? Let's just say, 3 things that you would if you had complete control and complete power, would you implement?
And may I say, it really feels like
just to put you on the spot,
that accountability feels like something that you're really going to bring to the table, and that feels
I
like
want accountability. I really want so
I like that. I'm gonna write that down.
Whenever anyone has asked me what's your biggest thing, the one thing, I say I want a Victoria that works, but underpinning that is good governance. I want a set of rules that are clear, where here's the agreement between council and the public about how we will come to our decisions, and that end of things.
Is that not clear right now? Is there?
They have it. I just don't know that it's being followed.
I think the MNP report was pretty...
Sorry, I don't know what that is.
Okay, so Myers Norris Penny was engaged to do a governance review.
Okay.
Right, and they did that governance review, and then they issued a report, and parts of it were dismissed. Well, it's people self-selected to do the survey and whatever else. Well, to be fair, on all City of Victoria surveys for the past 6 years, it's been self-selected. And at any rate, end of the day, they found that we need a code of conduct. Yeah. We need an integrity commissioner. These are things that are in place other places. Lawyers are a self-governing body, as an example. If a lawyer misbehaves, they will be brought. There's repercussions. A person can complain to the Law Society and say, hey, this lawyer did X. And the Law Society will investigate it and say, okay, you were bad. Here's your rap on the knuckles or whatever else. And here's what you have to do to make sure it doesn't happen again in the future. And I think we need to prevent conflicts of interest. I think normally you would have a circumstance where a counselor would say, hey, I'm in a conflict. I can't decide on this matter. Yeah. Normally. And that's what should happen.
I think it's important also to understand what conflict is and being able to identify where you're in conflict. Yeah. Because I think that is also what's missing too, is just they'll think, oh, I'm not in conflict. But if an independent, if someone independent can look at it and say, yeah, you're not in conflict, that to me says something.
Well, and it might even be useful as counselors because they're human. Yeah. I would love it if the integrity commissioner was similar to, and I am going to refer back to lawyers because that's the industry I'm familiar with. Yeah. So if a lawyer has a question about something and they're not quite sure about it, they can contact a bencher, right? Who is someone who's with the Law Society. And so this prevents complaints in the first place, and they can get that advice beforehand. Yeah. That would be super useful because counselors are humans. They're elected. They are our neighbors.
Yeah, that's right.
And
they're doing different things in the community.
They're doing different things. They have different backgrounds, different experiences. It's okay to ask a question.
Is there no ombudsman for the Victoria City Council, or that?
I'm not sure.
Sort of
I know that there isn't an integrity commissioner right now, and that was one of the recommendations of the MNP report. So I'd like to really see most, if not all, of those recommendations followed. Personally, a personal opinion here, I would prefer if the integrity commissioner, that end of things, were actually a provincial office under the Ministry of Municipal Affairs. Yes. And the reason being is there's something about a city having the budget for this and having control over that, whereas if it's
kind of
arm's
self-serving,
length, and not only that, but I think what has happened to Victoria could happen to any city so easily.
Yeah. Well, and I'm sure there's other cities that similar stuff happens. I mean, I don't know, but
so if it was provincial, A, the budget would be immune from city whims. B, it'd be at an arm's length. You'd have that stability. And C, again, this goes back to my whole, I hate having others experience really crappy things.
Yes.
So if I could prevent someone else from, or some other city from undergoing a similar level of dysfunction, that would be a good thing. So I'd like it if it was provincial. It's not. But if they're recommending it, why can't we have it?
Yeah. No, I think that's a great.
How
could anybody argue against that?
Well, no.
Accountability.
Accountability.
Yeah.
I assume it's like that in every municipality. I assume that Victoria is no worse than most municipalities.
I think
there's level of
I think we've seen new levels of weirdness over the last 6 years.
Have we not felt that everywhere, though? I mean,
I don't think we have.
I think there's similar issues, but I don't think the function is the same. Like, I think there is some uniqueness.
Okay.
Well, I mean,
we're also a very large city. Relative
we're
to some of the other
90,000
ones.
people.
Which is a good point. We are 90,000 people.
But is there not? Are there not accountability issues in Saanich and Langford, especially Langford? Let's say. I mean, have there not been accountability issues there for decades now?
Well,
like sure they get results, but the accountability as to how they get there is always.
Well, I guess it depends if you live in those communities.
Yeah, I'm close enough.
And the impact of decisions, because I mean, Stu Young has a pretty good stranglehold on Langford.
It sure does.
Is the outcomes good? I don't know. Like, I don't live in Langford.
I mean, I guess we'll see come October 15th. I mean, the idea that Victoria City Council right now, the only person who's rerunning for a council position, aside from the two that are running for mayor, is Ben Isett. Right? So I don't think we've ever seen so many seats open on council. Like, this next council is going to really have its work cut out for it. It's a bit of a daunting prospect just because you aren't going to have that corporate memory.
Yeah, that's right. Corporate memory is super important,
right?
As we know in business.
Yeah, right. So it's interesting, and
also a good opportunity to rewrite how things are done, or maybe go back
to
fresh
blood.
And when it comes to accountability, what's your number 2?
Yeah,
I like the accountability one.
Yeah,
I love that. Yep.
Number 2, I want to do a really good job of our core job. A really, really good job of just that core set of things that you expect your city to do really well, right? And it's a little like if you can't have the streets maintained, if you can't have people feel reasonably safe, what the heck are you doing expanding into these other areas before you've mastered your core set?
Yeah.
And those other areas might be really useful and good and everything else. I'm not saying that they're bad.
No.
I'm just saying
making sure your room's clean.
Make sure your room's clean before you go and
invite people to a party.
So housing and safety are kind of core at that. Like, that's what you're feeling?
Housing is provincial, but what would be core is how do we go about approving housing? How do we go about our development process? Is it reasonable or does it need work? An example would be, how long does it take a building permit to be issued?
Yeah.
Right? Not a rezoning, not just like a basic building permit. Yeah. How quickly can people get access to the Board of Variance when they need it?
Yeah.
Are our processes working well? The core set of processes. So housing, yes, but looking at what actually falls within the city's domain there and doing a really good job of that first. Zoning, et cetera. And with housing, one of the things that I think we do need to be concerned with is displacement. We've got really strong tree preservation bylaws. We don't have really strong tenant protection bylaws. Yeah. And one of the issues, and one of the reasons why I was against missing middle is I felt like there wasn't enough protection there when it came to the displacement of people. Yeah. Right? And when it
like
comes
rent evictions and things like that.
Well, and in this case, it might be you have this older home that's split into 3 units, common in Victoria.
Yeah.
Rent it out. It's a holding property, waiting for redevelopment, whatever. But when that goes to be redeveloped, those people have to find somewhere else.
Yeah.
And I don't think we've done a good job of measuring our housing stock. I think we should.
Yeah.
B, I don't think we've put in bylaws in place in terms of how do we go about that redevelopment process in a respectful way. because some of those people might be best served. Okay, you need to get on the wait list for BC housing. You've been on disability, you've been in this place for 20 years, it meets your budget, but there's no way you're going to be able to find something on the public market that's going to meet your budget. How do we facilitate that so that we don't harm people in the process?
Yeah, no, and I think that obviously is super important. I also think there's a bunch of stuff in our existing bylaws that could be flexed more. I know I'll give you a quick little rundown. Like we bought a triplex in 2005, I guess, somewhere around there. And my wife at the time, Joe Zambri, my brother-in-law, were in the top floor, brother-in-law was in the middle floor, and then we rented out the bottom floor. But when we bought that house, it was in a duplex and triplex neighborhood on Princess Avenue or Princess Street. And it was, so the zoning was in the area, but someone had downzoned it to single family. So the people that owned it and had been
legal non-conforming.
Yes, exactly. So that particular stock, and my get at the time, and I'm an entrepreneur, and I'm like, okay, well, why aren't you running it as a triplex, like highest and best use? It's built that way. It's got separation. They're individual units, all that kind of stuff. They're like, well, it's not allowed because it's single family dwelling. I went to city. Hey, I'm buying this property. What would I need to make it conforming? And they said, well, you're going to need off-street parking. You're going to need, various other things. You need fire separations between the floors, like all this stuff. And I'm like, okay, well, is it on a list for bylaw to shut it down if I do it? And they go, well, we're not enforcing that. So you don't have to really worry about that. That's what the city hall told me.
Right now. But then 6 months from now or a year from now, when they go, okay, we're enforcing that, are you screwed?
Well, I know, but okay, so for me, and this is an example, right? So in my mind, I was like, you know what? I'm a gambler. Let's gamble. So I made off-street parking. I basically, we were living in it. We just rented out one suite. So it wasn't, we were technically a single family even though we were two different households, my brother-in-law, my wife, and then we rented out the bottom. And I just did it and thought, whatever. So fast forward, 10 years, we sold it, all that stuff. And similar concerns came up again for the people that were buying it. It's like, well, this is technically both. I'm like, it is, but it's right. How much of that stock is out there where people are like, oh, I would love to rent out my basement suite, but it's not legal.
I'd like to know what that is.
Yeah.
And right now, we have no way of knowing.
Well,
right?
it's even, I think there's a section of the zonings where you can actually do renovations and add living accommodations. So we have bylaws that would allow stock to grow without doing a blanket rezoning. But one of the other things with the blanket rezoning is, people talk about developers, but I know some fairly successful developers in town. Yeah. And where they make most of their money is in rezoning. Yeah. So if there was no rezoning, they would be like, oh, okay, well, I'm just a builder now. And I don't want to make 15% profit on, $1 million house is not what I'm into. I want to make the $1 million on the rezoning, which is now you'd eliminate that. So there's two sort of...
It's complex.
It's complex, right? Like
and there's shades of gray, and it's nuanced, and...
But we have stuff that we can use. Like you can remove some parking requirements. You can allow people to do what is already built, right? Legally, and then give them the permission to do it.
But we should take stock of what's already there and 100%. How it's being used, and are there any problems with it?
Yeah. That would fall under the the core job and municipal governance. Thing,
and I'd have no problems looking at that, but I'd want to look at it first and actually really go, okay, where are we today? And one of the other things I want to move away from, and it's kind of critical when, like, Victoria's really unique in the sense that we have the CRD and then 13 municipalities.
Yeah,
and
crazy.
From a policy perspective, there's a lot of risk with being a policy outlier when your neighboring municipality is so close. And I think we've ran into a lot of unintended consequences when we've said, okay, we'll do this, but everyone else around us has said no.
Yeah, that's right.
And we saw it with 24/7 sheltering. Yeah. If all of the CRD said, okay, we'll do this, or even all of the province, we probably wouldn't have had an influx.
Yeah.
and it would have been a very different circumstance. But because we were a bit of a policy island, we wound up bearing a brunt there that wasn't great.
Was that just ill-conceived? Was that just not planning it properly?
I think it's unintended consequences.
Kicking
like,
into
I think the idea,
people's
the positive way to look at it would be unintended consequences. The more nefarious end would be someone wanted to make a political statement, and what's the most painful way to do it.
Yeah, that's wow. That for me, I don't even.
I don't want to go there.
Which is, but obviously there's, like you said, shades of gray, and there's a spectrum there.
Yeah.
And so when we're developing policy, I think Victoria is kind of special in the sense that we do need to put it into the context of the 13 other municipalities. And I was actually.
What do you think about amalgamation?
First, I think Victoria needs to get its own house in order before we go there. Like, right now, if I were a Esquimalt or Oak Bay or Saanich,
they'd be like, no way.
No way.
Yeah.
But if we got our own house in order, good governance, look, we all of our stuff is here, we're good, we're sane, we have good people at the helm, the other cities go, you know what, this makes sense.
Yeah.
Right? But right now, we're like a make-work project. We're like that fixer-upper that... And I can't expect another city to go, yeah, I want to jump into business with our city right now.
Yeah.
I'd like to get us to a point where we can look at that and we can bring value to the table, because I think we could make much better decisions and much better headway on a lot of our big issues. One of our big issues is like transportation.
Yeah.
Okay, it's not realistic for everyone to live in the core. It just isn't. How do we make it so that those that need to commute can do so in ways that have the least amount of impact, both on the amount of time it takes and the environmental impact, right? I can't see an LRT happening without amalgamation.
Yeah.
It might.
We need a tremendous amount of coordination. And even with the housing thing, like...
Even with the housing thing.
You can't... I mean, we've looked at, and are actively looking at, sheltering options and things like that. And I think you can't do it in, like, 10 cities don't work. No. And putting 100 people together, that doesn't work, because you do not get the wraparound services. You get unintended consequences. You get criminal activity, especially when you're dealing with an opioid.
I think the optics are really bad.
And the optics, it's just, who wants to...
It doesn't look good to put everyone into a camp situation.
But why not spread it over the CRD? Yeah. But how do you do that?
And some of it also needs triage. Some of it needs management, right? Like, again, shades of gray there. There's a huge difference between the student who's van lifing it because they can't afford an apartment, isn't into drugs, isn't into your average run-of-the-mill, just needs a safe, clean place to live. And the person who's, okay, I've done my sentence, I've been released into the community, I do have an addictions issue, but I can't get access to treatment. Two very, very different people.
And then over here, same is a person with the mental instability
and again,
is not getting the help from the province.
Needs the help from the province. So how do we do a better job of triaging that in the absence of data? In the absence of actually taking each person as an individual and going, what help do you need? What's it? The resources may not be there, but if they were, what would they look like? Because at least then you could say, here's the resources we need. Province. Come on, step up.
Well, the only time in my experience, and I have some relevant experience with the homeless population in Victoria, and I probably have 5 examples that ended in success, but it took the will of a few people to make that happen. And bird dogging, and when you don't have a safe place to sleep and you're sleep deprived and you've got all these underlying issues,
you're going to make terrible choices.
You make terrible choices, and then you just give up, because you literally, in order to get these people in these programs, you need an assistant that's working full time, calling these organizations and staying on them and getting beds and all this stuff. It's not reasonable to expect someone in those situations. Like, I kind of think I've got a whole team of people around me. I've got managers, I've got assistant managers, I've got assistance and this stuff. And for me to move anything forward, I need all those people to do their job.
Yeah.
How do you expect someone living on the street to do
well,
that?
and again, you can't necessarily expect the city to fill that role.
Oh, I agree.
They can fill the role of, okay, we are going to take the data, we are going to understand who's here, we're going to know our problem really well, but then the city's job is to push the province saying, here's our problem, here's what we need.
Yeah.
Please. And I wish that there was a provincial standard. Like, can you imagine if you live in a community without a school? Okay, we're a community of 7,500 people with 500 kids and we have no school. It would be insane. Or no hospital.
Yeah.
How is it that there isn't a consistent provincial standard for services for people who are experiencing homelessness?
Yeah.
How is it that that person doesn't have access to a social worker, which would be the role I would think that would be that hand-holding, okay, I know the constellation of services and who to go and where to put. Yeah. It's not there. The province has really not done their job, and they've neglected it to the city. And tent cities, I look at that as neglect. It doesn't serve the residents. It doesn't.
Well, the only reason why they're there is because there's no place for them to go, and the law doesn't allow them to be imprisoned.
And all of our municipalities aren't agreeing on.
Well, they're not agreeing, so one municipality is taking the brunt of it. And part of the reason is because a lot of the services, and also both positive and negative as far as the resources to help, are in Victoria, downtown, and all the fun stuff like drugs and
are also here.
They're also here, right? So it's sort of like, where are you gonna go live in Langford? And that's the other thing that kind of, because this person who I've known for a lot of years, who was living on the streets for 25 years, is now in housing and supported and all that stuff in Langford.
And that might be great for them, because then it's outside of the environment that has maybe...
It is true. But anytime she needs to go to the doctor, or she needs to see a counselor, or she needs to go...
Never mind finding a doctor.
Never mind finding a doctor. She's got to come into town. Right? Yeah. So you kind of have to meet people where they're at to some degree.
To some degree. But also, how do you support them to be in better places to begin with for them, right? And that's something where everyone on the team needs to understand their role and do their role well, and leave the other roles for someone else. Like, your business wouldn't work if you tried to be the cook and the cashier and everything all at the same time. No, you need everyone to pull their weight and do their job, right? Like, you might be able to fill in for a bit, but you're going to burn out if you try to do all of the jobs. And I think that's part of Victoria's challenge right now, is we've tried to do all the jobs. Yeah. And it was well-intentioned and everything else, but we're burning out.
Yeah. Well, the outcomes are horrible.
They are.
And we just went through a pandemic. I mean, there is some
things the pandemic was its own special beast.
Yeah. So, and that's where I kind of like to cut a little bit of slack, but there was a lot of these issues had started way before. And I think that's where we just need to get back to making sure our room is clean, making sure we're following the rules, making sure we're putting in common sense rules, and making sure that we can let the people, like even the staff in the city, is like, let them do their job. Like quit micromanaging. Yeah, quit micromanaging.
Get back to governance where it's like, okay, here's our big goals. City manager, here's our big goals. Tell us your plan for meeting those goals. Go out to your team. Yeah. And sometimes you have to hands off on that.
And proper public consultation, because I think there is public consultation, but a lot of the times they already know what they're going to do.
Well, and I am back from my government days. It was always decision-based evidence-making. Yeah. But when decision-based evidence-making feels like evidence-based decision-making, you've failed.
Yes, that's right.
Right? Yeah. So how do we identify the two, and how do we make a safe space in the city for city staff to go, okay, I feel safe enough, I can tell you what you need to hear, not what you want to hear.
Yeah, that's right.
Because I wonder if part of it's driven by fear. If I tell you what you need to hear, you're going to not be nice to me.
Yes, exactly. Dogpile.
And that's not functional either, right? Like,
and it's not really fair for public officials to do that. I'd rather have them be honest.
Yeah.
I don't care if someone's leading you off the cliff as long as they're telling me that they're leading me off the cliff. Right. And or I can make that decision.
But you don't want to be blindfolded.
No,
and said,
I'm like, well, we're off the cliff.
200 feet that way.
I thought you were the other. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, just be open and honest.
Yeah.
I've got a question.
Yes.
I've got a question because I think I speak for a fair chunk of the business community in Victoria.
Like all the coffee roasters? Like what?
Like, yes, it's specifically me. Specifically, I speak for myself.
Okay.
I've owned a business, paid business taxes, property taxes in Victoria for 26 years. I have not lived in Victoria for 20 years. I can't vote in Victoria.
But all of your income.
But all of my income, all of my output,
Yeah.
all of my community,
You
all of my
are
staff.
totally invested in this in ways that even many homeowners aren't.
Exactly. Yet I have no voice. And so if you get in, what would you do to allow more voices to be heard?
From the business community and...
From just more voices, because the more people who are able to vote, the broader spectrum.
Voting is one tool on a range of tools and a range of ways of having your voice heard. I think. It is a very critical, important tool in the sense, the thing that sucks about voting is you can only do it once every 4 years. Wish you could do it more often, frankly.
Right.
Even from the position of a candidate, I'm like, this is a 4-year commitment.
Yeah, it's a pretty big commitment.
Right? Like, it would be a different decision if it was a 2 or a 3-year commitment, but this is a 4-year commitment that you're stepping into. As a business owner, I don't see why we couldn't have a committee for business owners. Just like we have a disability committee, like we have a climate action committee. Why don't we have a local business community? Because those voices matter. Like, having a vibrant city relies upon having vibrant businesses. You don't have jobs without businesses. You don't have a nightlife without businesses or restaurants or coffees or all these things that make our city a really great place to live. So I'd like to see ways of bringing that in. There is, like, I understand if you own property in Victoria, you might be able to vote
if you own property.
if it's not corporately held. Or
that's right.
There's some
you got to own it
wiggles in
personally.
there.
I think.
And only one of the people who owns it can vote.
That's right.
Right? So you can become a non-resident property elector and vote that way. But that might be a very expensive thing to do for the privilege of one vote out of
30,000.
5,000 that actually exercise their right to do so. I wish more people did.
Totally.
One of the things I'd love to see is really high voter turnout. Because it says you're engaged, you care. This is part of the process.
And as a business owner, I am engaged and I do care, but
I know you do.
I don't have a say.
Well, we're going to get you a say.
I can go to committees and I can go to council and I can hear
the public hearings and all that stuff.
I do that occasionally, and I do step up when I see something that I want to talk about. For sure, my voice is not being heard when I want it to be. But my vote is never heard.
And I think that that's something that needs to be looked at by Elections BC, because there also needs to be a balance, right? The flip side is, you're a corporation, you're not a person. Elections are about government, and government is about people, not companies. And sometimes the line is really gray there. So I can see both sides of the argument there around, yes, we should allow business owners, and no, maybe we shouldn't.
I think a seat at some table, and I think it's even like the Truth and Reconciliation component and Indigenous voices. I'd love to see an Indigenous-led committee that engages with the city council. And I would eventually like to see a seat that's dedicated, to Indigenous issues or Indigenous person on the council, especially when we live in the community that we live in here. But at least at a minimum, like a committee that is engaged in issues that affect Indigenous people, and especially with employment and entrepreneurship and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Janice, we got to end this. We
We
said
do gotta
60
end it.
minutes, and it's now an hour and 23.
I'm like, I've got to be somewhere in 10 minutes where my daughter is going to string me up.
We're going to do that. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you for the discussion. Thank you for standing up and running.
It was
Good
thoroughly
luck to
enjoyable.
you. Yes, absolutely.
So thank you for the invite.
Yeah,
I greatly appreciate
our pleasure.
it.
Yeah, we're happy to hear a variety of different ideas, and I agree with you on many of your points, which is how we should be running our city.
Right?
Less divisiveness.
Yes.
Yeah,
more agreement.
More togetherness.
Thank you.
Janice, thanks so much for being here.
Janice.
It was really great.
Very nice to meet you in person.
Yes.
And very nice to make your acquaintance as well.
And we'll look for you on the 15th.
Yes.
Vote Janice.
There you go.
Thanks, Janice.
Well, Kaylin,
that was it.
Another one in the books. We're going to do another one, aren't we?
Yes, we are.
Okay, until then.
We're going to talk to you in the next couple minutes.
Well, okay, until then, be really nice.
And be kind.
Okay, I will. Thanks, brother.
Thanks.
Bread and Butter Collective's membership includes the following local businesses: 2% Jazz, 900 Degrees Wood-Fired Pizzeria, Agrius, Big Wheel Burger, Blue Mountain Solutions, Bodega Tapas Wine Bar, Brentwood Bay Village Emporium, Nourish and Charlotte the Quail, Victoria Chocolate and Company, Drum Roaster Coffee, Habit Coffee, Foo Asian Street Food, the Culinary Arts Program at Camosun, Cafe Fantastico, Fall Epi, Harold Street Brewworks, Hey Happy, House of Botang, Hoyne Brewing, Jetty Marie's Cracker Company, La Pasta, La Rue Patisserie, Mocha House, Part and Parcel, Poco a Pinto Bar, Pizzeria Prima Strada, Rain Dogs, Roast, Table 9 Consulting, Sherwood Cafe and Bar, Sweets by Selena, The Collective Wine Bar and Kitchen, The Drake, Tapa Bar, Taco Stand Al Pastor, Toque, The Whole Beast, The Wienery, and Zambries.
To hear more from the Bread and Butter Collective, go to checknews.ca/podcasts on Check Plus, or find us on your favorite podcasting platform.